When I was 22 years old, I was robbed. Essentially, 3 men came into my restaurant after hours and held a gun to my head. So I was lying on a floor, and I genuinely thought I was about to die. It led to PTSD that I still struggle with. I would never wish it on anyone, and yet it was life-changing for me. I think some of our most valuable lessons come in negative experiences. What will make us feel good tomorrow and the next day versus what we will look back on and think, ugh, why did I waste my time doing that? Because I'm always ready to use time productively. And also, I have never in my life felt regret for never having been on TikTok. I think some of the happiest, most fortunate things that I do in my life were all yeses that I would have said no's to had I not had the philosophy. We allow the door to be opened and we allow ourselves to step through to the other side. My assumption is no one likes me, no one wants to hear from me. I have to find a really effective way to grab their attention and hold it at all times. For all of human history, no one has wanted to listen to anything anyone has to say unless they have something meaningful to say. I really believe that storytellers are people who are self-centered in a positive way.
Hi everyone, it's Lydia here. So Escape 9 to 5 is my podcast that I interview interesting people who have crafted this portfolio life, and they're usually not on a traditional 9 to 5 job. They either have spent some time there and changed their path and now they're on a more pathless path, or they just crafted this portfolio life for themselves. So today's interview is me with Matthew Dix. I have been looking forward to presenting this interview with you because this is one of my favorites. And Matthew Dix is renowned and famous author, and he has 2 books I enjoy really a lot. One is Storyworthy. It tells you how to write a good story, and the other one is called Some Days Today. It's one of the best books that motivates you to start something. And in our conversation, we went on a lot of different directions. We talked about the accident that made him become who he is today. We also talked about how is the best way to tell a story. And then at the end of the day, storytelling is so important no matter what you do in your life. It's just the best way to make sense of life. And as you can learn from this podcast, what is the best way to tell a story. Yeah, so I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I do.
Hi.
How you doing?
Good. Nice to meet you. Thanks so much for your time. I think I would do a little bit of introduction. So Escape 9 to 5 is my own podcast I just started. I wanted to interview people who have escaped 9 to 5 or have some kind of portfolio life like yourself, just to show other people that there's a different way of living. I also need this encouragement from other people. Usually, I will let the guests to tell 2 truths and a lie about Escape 9 to 5, your version. What type of 2 truths and a lies about your experience navigating the different roles?
So I have a bunch of different roles in my life, so I came up with 2 truths and a lie about some of those roles that I happen to have. So here we go. I wrote a book almost entirely based on lists written in boring meetings.
Yeah.
I threw a shoe at a student, a 10-year-old girl, and hit her in the head on the very first day of school. And I once met David Hasselhoff at our fundraising show, and he pulled me into a corner to record the story that I had just told on stage.
My God, all of those sounds like truth. I read Your Storyworthy and Some Days Today. I think the first 2 are truths. The last one also sounds like truths, but I haven't read it somewhere, so...
Yes, the first 2 are truths. I did write a book based on lists. I did throw a shoe at a student on the first day of school and hit her in the head. It wasn't David Hasselhoff who I was pulled aside by. It was David Blaine, the magician. So I was at a fundraiser with him, and I told the story on stage, and later on he pulled me aside. I didn't know it was David Blaine. I just thought it was some person who was donating money. And then while we were talking, I happened to say, did you ever tell a story on a stage before? And he said, well, I did a TED talk about holding my breath for 17 minutes. Mm-hmm. And I said, are you David Blaine? And he said, yes, I thought you knew. And I said, no, I did not. But that's the way you do 2 truths and a lie. You just change one small part of the truth and then it becomes a lie.
That's so smart. I love to do this with all my friends. I think it really helps people to know each other, especially in a social setting. So I think also it's a good way to get to people's story as well.
Well, it was a chance for me to say I'm an author, I'm a teacher, and I'm a performer. So all of those things.
Yeah. So I think it's a nice segue that we go into the why then question. I actually was listening to your podcast with Ali last year about the Some Days Today, and then I felt like I have the answer for this question already, but I would love to hear your version today about how you actually made a pivot or like you decided you want to have a portfolio life. I feel like you have that even before you start your career because of what happened when you were 22.
Yes, that's very true. I didn't really have much of a direction before I was 22. I had always thought I would be a teacher someday, but I didn't think it would actually ever happen. I hadn't gone to college. No one in high school, my parents, my teachers, my guidance counselors, none of them had ever even said the word college to me. So when I was 18, I was sort of made to believe that college wasn't something I was going to be able to do, even though I had excellent grades and I was a pole vaulter and a drummer. I had a lot of extracurricular activities. For some reason, people just didn't see me as someone who could ever attend school. And so I thought, I want to be a teacher someday, but I can't ever be a teacher without going to college. So I was sort of lost for a little while. I was managing McDonald's restaurants, actually, from the age of 17, which I used to sort of shy away from telling people. And now that I work with people in the business world, corporate leaders and things, they're all really drawn to it. They really recognize the value of managing a building and people and profit and loss and all of that for more than a decade, even if it's a fast food restaurant, actually, especially because it's a fast food restaurant. So I was doing that. And then there was an evening when I was 22 years old and I was robbed. Essentially, 3 men came into my restaurant after hours and held a gun to my head and threatened to pull the trigger if I didn't open a compartment of the safe that I could not open. One of those manager does not have key situations, which was true. And they didn't really believe me. So I was lying on a floor in the back of a fast food restaurant and I genuinely thought I was about to die. And I was just astounded by the fact that as this man was counting back from 3 so that he could pull the trigger and shoot me in the head, I wasn't afraid and I wasn't angry. The only feeling I was consumed with was regret about everything I had yet to do, which is essentially everything I ever wanted to do. And, he pulled the trigger on an empty gun. Thankfully, I'm still here today. But that was sort of the moment I came to the understanding about how fleeting and fragile life really is, and how if I want to meet my end someday, feeling not filled with regret, but filled with satisfaction, I had to begin doing everything all at once as quickly as possible.
Thanks so much for sharing that with me and all my audience. I sort of reminded myself that I have a version of that story as well. So I was studying in University of Rochester 10 years ago. I went to a restaurant at 9 p.m. It's a Japanese restaurant with my friend. We sat down and 2 gunmen basically robbed the whole restaurant. I remember you said that you don't want this to happen to anyone else. I said the same thing to my friends. But thank God that they didn't pull the trigger or whatsoever, because everybody is extremely, extremely cooperative. We just gave money to them. But I have that moment in my life at the time. I felt like I was about to die at that 1 minute or 2 minutes that when the gunmen are around. And hearing your story, and it made me realize maybe that's the way I am today. And because I wanted to make life count, because I don't know, you never know what's going to happen the next second.
Yeah, I would never wish it on anyone. And yet it was life-changing for me. I don't know if I would go back and do it again. It led to PTSD that I still struggle with today. So there's certainly some ramifications that are not so pleasant, but my friends know how relentless I am. And my kids know how relentless I am. My daughter says, you're the only person who likes Monday mornings in the whole world. And I tell her that quite literally when I woke up this morning. When I wake up, I'm so happy that I didn't die overnight. I wake up so happy that I have another day ahead of me. And so I do. I like Monday mornings, oddly. And it's because of that thing that happened to me in the past. So it's a weird thing to wrestle with, the idea that it changes your life and yet you don't wish it on anyone and you kind of don't wish it on yourself. And yet the results have been, life-changing.
Like Monday, it has never happened to me before. Before I changed to the climate focused banking career, there was a point of time I'm actually looking forward to Monday. I think there will be questions from a lot of folks, because after you work some years, every day feels the same and you don't feel like you're adding any value to your life anymore. And I saw that in your book, The Some Days Today is really, really helpful. You have the 22 tips, basically, how you can life, and especially for somebody like you have never really left left 9 to 5, but you just craft this creative pursuits and normal 9 to 5 life to also make an impact so well. I think you always have that in you to make you realize you can do both. Maybe you can just give a little bit of prompts or like encouragement for people who think that they couldn't.
Right. Well, my book talks a lot about just the way we choose to use our time and recognition over what will make us feel good tomorrow and the next day versus what we will look back on and think, ugh, why did I waste my time doing that? So, one of my favorite things to do is to ask people, we'll ask your audience right now, what the number 1,440 means, right? Which I've never actually met a person who hasn't read my book who knows the meaning of that number. It's the number of minutes in a day. So when we start to think about our life in terms of minutes rather than hours, possibilities open up. When we think about our lives in 24-hour increments, that essentially means we're breaking our lives down into 24 parts that we get to use throughout the day. Maybe if we think in half-hour increments, we have 48. But that's still not many blocks of time because we're going to spend a lot of that sleeping and doing things we don't need to necessarily be enjoying, commuting and eating and things like that. But when we think about 1,440, well, now you get to think about your life in 1-minute increments. So that means before I logged on to this podcast and before we began speaking, I literally had 2 minutes before we logged on. And I think most of the time when people have 2 minutes, they pick up their phone and they start scrolling through nonsense that will mean nothing and will probably make them feel worse after scrolling than before scrolling. And instead, I always have something on my screen. I actually am building a new website with some people, and they ask me to create a list of interesting biographical moments in my life. So I've been making this list, and with 2 minutes before logging onto the podcast, I opened up the document and I added 4 things to the list. So I use that 2 minutes productively because I'm always ready to use time productively. I've set myself up in a way that if I have 10 minutes, I can do something. If I have 3 minutes, I can do something. And that's not always like accomplishing some writing goal or some speaking goal or some teaching goal. A lot of times I'll say, I have 10 minutes. I'm going to go wrestle my son for 10 minutes. And that's going to make me happy. Or I have 4 minutes. My daughter watched Scream 4 yesterday, a horror movie that I've never seen. But I can use these 4 minutes to have her tell me about the movie because she loves talking about movies. So whether it's spending time with my children or my wife or literally practicing my golf swing over in the corner if I have 5 minutes, or writing or preparing a lesson or working on a talk, I just don't waste minutes. And I think when we start to think of our lives in that way, we can be more creative, even if we are in a 9-to-5 life. Even if today I'm going to go and teach 10-year-olds for a while. I'm going to, teach them for 7.5 hours, and I'm going to enjoy my time with them. But I'm going to make sure that the time I'm not with them, I am doing something that's going to make me happy about the way I spent my time tomorrow, a week from now, and a month from now.
It's sort of like you have a system to help you maximize every second and every minute of your day.
Yes, and avoid things that kill you. I've never in my life been on TikTok. And also, I have never in my life felt regret for never having been on TikTok, right? I don't walk through life going, oh my gosh, what am I missing out on by not being on TikTok? Nothing, actually. I'm missing out on nothing. I know I'm missing out on nothing. So avoiding things that drain our time in ways that we will only feel bad about in the future, right? There's no way that when you're 80, you're going to think, I am so glad I spent 2 hours a day in my 30s staring at TikTok. That was an excellent use of my time. There's just no way that's going to happen. Okay. So we either choose to do things that we're going to be happy about and will make us better, happier, more productive people, or we choose to spend our time on things we will ultimately regret.
For me now, because I'm in my 30s, I don't really use TikTok. I wanted to use it at some point, but I never really felt the joy using it. And I always find more joy reading books and creating my own content rather than, watching other people's lives. So I think for a lot of people, it's more like to start something that's really enjoyable for them. It's kind of hard.
Well, I would hope people have passion for something. And if you don't, get out into the world and try things. You should always be, I'm always trying to push my boundaries. I'm asking myself all the time, what's the thing I'm afraid of? What's the thing I haven't done that I see other people doing that I sort of wish I was doing? We often don't have passions until we try something. I'm a huge golfer. I love playing golf. But for sadly, a decade, my friends were playing golf and I thought it looked stupid. I thought it looked like a stupid game played by rich white people, and I wanted nothing to do with it. And then one day, my friend bought me a $10 set of clubs at a yard sale, threw them into my truck, and said, "We're going to take you to play golf once. And if you don't like it, that's fine." And I grudgingly agreed. And now it's a thing I love doing. But I was willing to be open up. I was willing to be open enough to at least say, I will try it once. Let's see how I feel about it. I was ready to hate it and laugh at it. But by the time I was done, I thought, this is great. Not only is it like a fun game, but I immediately recognized I just spent 2.5 hours with 3 of my closest friends, walking in nature, exercising, and talking. Even if you don't like the game, it's still a great thing to do because it's a perfect way to spend time with friends out in nature while you're getting some exercise. I thought, this is great. And if I can get good at this game, it'll be even better.
One of the epiphany I have when I'm reading your book is you have the philosophy of say yes to things, which when I read it, I was like, oh, that's why I got a yes from Matt. But if you can elaborate a little bit more for folks so then they have also this philosophy for themselves as well.
Sure. I think it's popular these days for people to say no to a lot of things. I think a lot of people giving advice in the world say that you have to make sure you maintain your boundaries and learn to say no, and you can't say yes to everything. And I think that's foolish. I think that the philosophy we should have is we say yes to every opportunity, meaning we allow the door to be opened and we allow ourselves to step through to the other side. So a yes can simply mean I'm going to play golf once and I will see how it feels. And if I had played that first round of golf and I hated it completely, I would have simply stepped back through the door, closed it, and said, okay, I said my yes, and now my yes is a no because I gave it a chance. I think the mistake people make is they say no without ever acknowledging that the opportunity might produce something. I think some of the happiest, most fortunate things that I do in my life were all yeses that I would have said no's to had I not had that philosophy, like playing golf or going to the Moth in 2011 and standing on a stage in New York to tell a story in a competitive environment, something I didn't want to do. But my friend said, you should go do it. And I thought to myself, well, I say yes to everything. So I have to go do this one thing, thinking I would go to New York, tell one story and never tell another one again. And now I do it for a living. And it's the only reason I work with Fortune 100 companies today on marketing and sales. It's because I stood on a stage, 13 years ago in New York and told a personal story. And today it is my business and my life and my passion. But it's only because I said yes to something I wanted to say no to. And so a yes does not mean a permanent obligation. A yes says, I'm going to go give that a try. I'm going to give it an honest, open-minded try. And a lot of times, yeses just become no's. We close the door. We say, no, thank you. A friend took me to play tennis once. I played tennis for a week. And after a week, I said, no, I don't want to play this game. I hate this game. It's really not fun. And I don't enjoy it. I gave it a try. I closed the door. So we have to say yes to everything because there will come a day when people stop asking you to do things. That will tragically probably happen to you. And when that day comes, you will reflect on all the opportunities you did have that you rejected because you thought you were too busy or you weren't going to like it or it wasn't for you. So recognize the fact that when people are asking you to do things, it's a unique and wonderful time in your life and you have to take advantage of it.
I read a story when you go to Moth, even when you were there, you didn't want to go up to the stage. It's because your wife was next to you. It's oftentimes helpful than your partners who are encouraging you, right?
Right. Or you just make a verbal commitment. I often do that. So, I do stand up now. I didn't want to do stand up because it was terrifying to me. It really, I can tell a story on the stage that I want to be funny because even if it's not funny, I'm still telling a story. It works anyway. But to go on a stage and have to be funny terrified me. And I only did it because a friend called me and said, hey, do you want to stand up? And I said, no, I never want to do that. And basically hung up on him. And then I called him five minutes later and said, okay, I have to do it because I have to say yes. And I now do stand up pretty regularly. That friend has never done stand up once. He asked me to do it with him. And yet 6 years later, he has yet to take a stage to actually do that stand up because he doesn't have that yes philosophy. I had to do it though, because I made a verbal commitment to him. I said to the universe, okay, I'll give stand up a try. Just like I said, okay, I'll give golf a try. Okay, I'll go to the Moth and give that a try. So getting that commitment from friends can simply mean you tell people you're going to do it, and then they will continue to hold you accountable until you do it.
I think it's a nice segue to go to our next part is what now? You alluded to so many projects, you're stand up, you're working with Fortune 500, 100 companies, and then you're also teaching. So what is the most exciting thing that you would like to share with our listeners at the present moment, like for this month, this quarter for you?
Sure. I have sort of two big things on my plate right now that I'm contending with. One is I have a book coming out in June, a new storytelling book. Oh, nice. So I'm in the process of recording the audio version of that right now and sort of getting everything finalized. I get emails from my editor just about every day saying, hey, did you want to use this word or this word? We're proofreading it. And hey, did you want the comma here or here? So I'm dealing with a lot of that, but that's exciting to get the book done and especially to get the recording done.
Congratulations. You've done the recording. You finished.
I haven't. I'm almost done it. I have to do something called pickups now, which is they listen to your recording and they find all your mistakes. And then you have to go back into the studio and begin recording to fix all the mistakes. Okay. So I have that going. And then I have a storytelling company called Storyworthy. We produce courses for people and we're sort of launching a big deal. My problem with storytelling is I want everyone to be great storytellers, genuinely. I want the world to be filled with better storytelling. And when I produce a course and I sell it, what makes me crazy is if I have 6 courses to sell, I want everyone to have all of them. But not everyone wants to buy everything I produce. So we're creating a system where people can sort of become members so they can just have access to everything. Because I genuinely want everyone to be the best possible storyteller they can be. And so I'm trying to create a way that they can sort of get all of my stuff if they want it, and not have to worry about what's right and what's wrong for them. So my company is sort of working on this big undertaking to make this happen. And I have some good partners working with me who do most of the work. I basically sit in front of this camera and speak into this microphone and they make everything else look good. So we're working on that. So company and book are the two things right now that we're working on.
That's great because we'll put a link when it's ready so people can. I think your book of Storyworthy really changed the way that I see life and in general, because now I have tried your homework of life since 2021. And at the beginning of this year, I started to write down like 1,000 words every day because I was going through a very difficult part of my life. I'm trying to like record everything, what has happened every day. And then when I look back, like 2 months later, 3 months later, then I realized actually a lot of things that we care so much at that day, it doesn't really matter that much when you zoom out. And it's a great memory as well. When I look back, I actually had that thought that day. And I really love the way that you help us to navigate our life and to put a narrative on our own life stories. I think because we don't want to be regretful, as you said, when we're like 100 years old and we couldn't remember anything. It will be really, really helpful once you have that membership site. I'll share with all my friends as well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we're close. It's getting close. I love that perspective you described, though. I use it with people all the time. I say, listen, Is this going to matter 2 weeks from now? And if it's not going to matter 2 weeks from now, let's just pretend that it's 2 weeks from now right now. And, I make my wife and my friends and my colleagues crazy because I never feel any stress. Nothing sort of ever bothers me. My daughter just told me this. I was giving her advice about something happening at school, and she said, well, that makes me really uncomfortable. And I said, well, everyone's uncomfortable sometimes, Clara. And she said, you're never uncomfortable. Nothing bothers you. Like she sort of ranted at me. And I said, I'm sure there's something that bothers me. And so we called my wife and I said, honey, Clara says there's nothing that bothers me. And, I'm never worried about anything. What do I worry about? What bothers me? And she took a moment. And then she said, yeah, there's really nothing. It's very frustrating. But a lot of it is that perspective of what is important and what's going to mean something and what it means something. And there are things in life that genuinely mean something in the future. There are, especially as a parent, things that you recognize, I want to get this right today because it will matter 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now, 2 years from now. But most things don't. Most things do. If you play the long game, which is I'm always telling my business partner, he's always worried that like we're not going to get this membership program out quick enough. And I say, well, if it's 1 week late, will that matter to us in a year that it came out on May 12th instead of May 19th? Not going to matter at all. So let's stop worrying about this nonsense and just get things right, live without stress, know that progress is happening, and it makes people crazy. It's hard for people to to watch someone sort of move through life with such ease. And it's only a mindset. It's simply the mindset of, will this matter to me today? And if it doesn't, if it's not going to matter to me tomorrow or the next day, it's not going to bother me now.
Yeah, I think it's also a practice, a mindful muscle as well. I believe many of us wanted to have that move through life with ease, but I think not many people can actually do that. Part of it must be because you've been managing like stressful situations when you were 17, 18 in McDonald's. That compared to that and all the other things doesn't really stress you anymore.
Right. Yes. Well, when I, between the ages of 19 to say 22, I was arrested for a crime I didn't commit, put on trial for that crime. I became homeless. And then I had that robbery. So that was a really tough, 8 months of my life. And so when I got through it, then I finally got to college. And when I got to college, I was attending 2 colleges full time to get 2 different degree programs at each college while managing a McDonald's full time and working part time at a writing center and starting a DJ company, doing all of these things at the same time. And people ask me, how did you ever do all of those things? How is that even possible? And I said, it's because just before that, I had been on trial and homeless and the victim of a horrific robbery. So nothing seemed hard after that. It seemed easy to work on 2 degree programs and manage a restaurant and launch a new business. I was so happy to be doing all those things rather than what I had just experienced that it was nothing to me. And sort of that has been the rest of life, which is if it's not trial and jail and homelessness and robbery, then it's probably not so bad. And I think it's going to be okay. Again, I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but if we can sort of frame our lives in relation to some of those actual terrible moments, if you've had an actual terrible moment and you can sort of remind yourself that you're not in that moment and you get to be in this slightly difficult moment, this, annoyingly bureaucratic moment, those things sort of go away completely because we stop worrying about them because we're just happy not to be in the place we once were.
I can tell talking to you, it just gives me so much calm, I think, compared to all the other people that I have come across at work. And, people are sort of in high stress corporate world. We are sort of moving through life as if there's one space extra in a sentence that the world will end, but actually it's never the case.
No, and most people don't even notice it. Most people are not noticing most things. It's really, I once spent an hour on a call that thankfully I was being paid for to figure out whether we want to use the word collaboration or cooperation. And I listened to people debate for about an hour over the difference between those two. And I just kind of sat there and was paid for an hour of my time to occasionally offer an opinion. But mostly my opinion was this actually doesn't matter, that no one's going to care, and that customers are not going to suddenly be moved by the idea of a cooperation versus collaboration. So it didn't matter. But for some reason, people like it to matter. People think that these things are important. Now, if you're a poet, absolutely, word choice matters, right? Poetry, even my novel writing to a certain degree, word choice is really going to stand up. Word choice really matters, but not in the middle of a marketing deck. One slide is not going to change the world.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a nice segue that we go into the next part is what next. You sort of have already touched upon it. You have a new storytelling focus coming out, your new website, your membership program. Is there anything else you want to mention?
Oh, well, I say we should always be working on things. We should be looking to the next thing. Actually, I do a show with my friend Jenny, and we do storytelling improv, which is the audience gives us a word and we have to tell a true story from our lives based upon that word on the spot and be entertaining, and people pay money to do it. And it makes Jenny crazy, but she does it and she's very good at it. And so we did one recently, and after the show, we were sitting down having dinner with my family. And I said to Jenny, when are we going to do it next? When should we plan for the next one? And she said, can't I just enjoy this one? And my son said, Dad only enjoys the next thing he's going to do. He doesn't enjoy the thing he just did. And my son's not entirely wrong. Certainly look back fondly on the things that I've done. But if I don't have the next thing ahead of me, then I'm sort of at a loss looking for the next thing. So like in terms of what I'm doing now, I have 2 books coming out this year, maybe 3, depending on how things work out. I have a middle grade novel, my first book written sort of for kids that I teach that age. That'll be a novel. I have a picture book. I've been writing those for a long time. And finally, I have a picture book that someone might be interested in. And I'm working on a new solo show. I did a solo show last year at some theaters in hopes of getting a Broadway producer's attention. It hasn't happened yet, but I'm relentless. So the show I did last year was great. Yeah. So I'm working on those 3 things. Those are my next big projects, but there's always going to be something else on the horizon. I just think you should always have that horizon thing ahead of you that you're working on. My son's not wrong. I'm not happy unless I'm thinking about the next thing I'm doing.
Something that makes you excited about tomorrow and the morning.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
If you were to time travel to 2030, let's say, that's in the horizon, what would be the one proud project you would like to tell yourself because of what you've been working on from now to then?
Well, I mean, I guess it's probably what I just said. My dream is to be able to travel the country and fill genuine theaters, like, hundreds of people. I would like them to come and watch my shows that I produce. Right now, I can get hundreds of people in cities that know me, which is, essentially in Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York. And I can do that occasionally. But what I'd like to do is get the attention of people who could help me do that. I think that what I do in terms of being on stage for a solo show or for stand up and the combination of those things is very good. But I think getting that attention is hard. And I also know that, unfortunately, as much as I would like to do those things, that often requires you being in a city every night, performing on a stage every night. And that is not something I can do or want to do, especially now because I have kids who are the most important things in my life and a wife who's the most important thing. So I can't do that thing that so many people do, which is they're on stage every night performing, trying to find an audience. So I am on stage once or twice a week trying to find an audience, a little harder for me. But if I could see myself out in the distance, actually filling theaters with people watching me perform, that's sort of the goal for me.
Oh, wow. That's such a nice vision. We hope that will happen. I will believe that it will.
Yeah, I hope so too. But if it doesn't, I'm also deeply satisfied with, I produced a solo show last year. I sold out a theater for a weekend. I brought in 1,000 people. They watched me perform, and that was great. And if that's all that ever happens for that show, then that's okay. Because I did a thing. I often think, do something that most people are not doing. Most people are not selling out theaters and performing. And so I think, well, no one's doing that. So I did that. No one is writing novels. I don't have a friend who's published a book. So I'm doing that. So look for the things people aren't doing and see if you can do those things. Even if you're doing them at a smaller scale, you're still doing something that most people are not accomplishing. So it makes you feel good when you're doing things that are different than the people around you.
Yeah, that's so good. I think that's part of the reason why I'm doing my YouTube and also this podcast. And because of this podcast, next month, I'm actually going to Anna's storytelling show in Singapore.
Hi, Singapore.
Yeah. Oh, Anna, that's right. Yes.
Anna,
I love Anna. Yes, I know Anna very well.
She's your student. Yeah. And then because I'm going to Singapore for a climate conference, that's my career passion. And then I was like, why not just to participate in her show?
Yeah. She's a great storyteller.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, on your show, were you recording it? Because I was thinking, Oh, you did. Can people find it? Is it on your channel or your website?
It's not yet. What happened is I've sent it to Broadway producers first because sort of if people want to produce it and work on it with me, they don't want it in the public yet. They don't want to have people watching it. So I have a recording that honestly, I'm not that happy with. I wish it had come out better. The production of the recording was not as good as I had hoped. I hired, a team to do it and it came out okay, but not ideal. So I've actually performed that solo show twice this month, actually, in other theaters in New York. So I'm hoping to find the right theater at the right time, hire the right crew and get a really perfect recording of it. But I can't publish anything until I sort of make sure that no one wants it. I have to make sure everyone who could want it rejects it. And then I'm willing to put it out into the world.
Yeah. When will be the next one? Are you planning to do the next one in New York?
Well, I'll start here in Hartford. I have a theater that's willing to work with me, and it's the perfect size. It's about 300 seats. So I'll produce that probably in November. And then once it's done and I have a recording of it, we send it to theaters, and then some theaters express interest and bring me in and have me perform. So we'll see how it goes.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll stay tuned on that one.
Yes.
Let's do a lightning round.
Yes.
So what's one piece of advice you find yourself repeatedly sharing with aspiring storytellers? And secondly, with corporate workers?
It's going to be the same piece of advice for both groups. I am constantly telling people that no one wants to hear anything you have to say unless you give them a reason to listen. In the corporate world, it's weird that just because someone's standing on a stage, or you're a vice president, or your Zoom microphone is on and everyone else's is off, they just assume that people are listening to them. And the truth is, no one ever listens to anybody unless you actually find a way to be entertaining, engaging, interesting, connective, all of those things I teach people to do. And yet, for some reason, people just assume attention. And the same thing in the storytelling world. People think, well, I'm going to tell a story about myself. But unless you actually craft it to be an entertaining, vulnerable, connective, funny, sad, exciting story, unless you build all those strategies in, suspense and surprise, no one will listen, even if they're in an audience. I'm sure you've had situations where you're sitting in a theater or you're sitting in a conference room and someone's speaking and you've essentially tuned them out. And that happens all the time. Truly, it is in my bones that I assume whenever I'm speaking to anyone, that's my students later today when I'm teaching, or you right now, or, when I stand on a stage next week, my assumption is no one likes me. No one wants to hear from me. I have to find a really effective way to grab their attention and hold it at all times. I think when we can believe that, and sort of operate from that absolute fundamental belief, then we become better performers, better entertainers, better storytellers, better presenters. But we have to believe that nobody wants to hear anything we have to say. It's the only way to get there.
Yeah, people's attention span is so short these days. Your book, Story Worthy, has a really, really good technique. It's the 5-second change rule in any of the stories. If you can just share a little bit, not too much, people should go buy your book and read it. So people have that. I think it's sometimes difficult to find this. Like, if I just have a normal day, it's kind of difficult unless I really intentionally to look for that 5-second. So if you can share one.
Yeah. Well, essentially it means that every story, whether it's a film, a book, a story that I tell on a stage, a play, a musical, every story that's ever been told is essentially about change over time. A protagonist, a character, or you changes in some way over time. And that change ultimately happens instantaneously. It's always near the end of the story, maybe at the very end of the story. But essentially, a character is one version of themselves, or you are one version of yourself. And then some stuff happens. And in the end, we're looking for that singular moment of change. It's usually a change in the way you think about the world, about yourself, about your children or your spouse or your boss or your job, or it's a change in you as a person. Like, I used to be this kind of person, and then suddenly now I'm a new kind of person. It's not really sudden because it takes a long time for that change to happen. But when the actual moment of change takes place, there is a singular moment where we once were one thing and then we switch to the other, or we once thought one thing and we switch to the other. That's what we're aiming for. If we tell stories about those singular moments of change, the same way novelists and filmmakers and playwrights do, then we're going to grab people's attention. I actually don't think also that the struggle today is with attention span. I don't think we have to assume people don't want to listen to us because everyone has a short attention span. I think it's always been true. I think that for all of human history, no one has wanted to listen to anything anyone has to say unless they have something meaningful to say. I think it was, when human beings gathered around fires, and just were learning to talk for the first time, I think the people around those fires who had something meaningful to say gathered people's attention and held their attention. And those people who didn't have anything interesting to say were the listeners, were the audience members who never, sort of got a chance to speak. And I think that was as far back as before there was something to distract us. So I don't think it's a matter of a shortening attention span. I just think it's human nature that why would you want to listen to someone who has nothing to say? So we have to give them a reason to listen to what we have to say.
That's so true. Like, it's more about how do you grab people's attention rather than people's attention span is short.
Right.
So if you
Yes.
can only tell stories from one genre for the rest of your life, thinking of what type of genre would be that?
Yeah, that's a terrible question because it sounds it's like a terrible choice to make. But I guess I would have to put everything aside except for my personal stories.
Mm.
As much as I like being a novelist and a nonfiction writer and a columnist, when I tell personal stories, not only do I entertain audiences and connect with people in really profound ways, but I managed to make a lot of sense of my life. I really believe that storytellers are people who are self-centered in a positive way, meaning we actually afford ourselves time to think about ourselves. And in doing that, in looking for stories in my life and then sharing them with other people, I'm just a happier, better person. I often say that the first and most important audience member for any story you ever tell is yourself. So if I
Yes.
could only tell one, I'd be telling personal stories, both because audiences love them and it's a way for me to connect to people, but also because I'd lose that opportunity to make sense of my life if I wasn't able to tell them.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Everyone should have that, I think. So speaking of personal story, I have this lightning round question I ask for everyone have you ever heard of CDR, this term called before?
Oh, CTR? No.
CDR stands for carbon dioxide removal. CDR. So that's
Okay.
what my career is about. I wanted to help companies who are actually removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which is also
Oh,
very important for humanity. It's
yeah.
just my chance to tell my story. And also, I want to spread this idea to everyone I know. So now you know
Yes.
CDR. Yes.
Yes. Yes. I think, you planet changers, you ones who want to save our planet are very important people. Yeah. I see what's coming. And, the only good thing about climate change I see is we get to tell the people who used to say it wasn't going to happen. We get to say, I told you so. And that makes me so happy to be able to do that. I love saying I told you so to people. It means the destruction of the planet in the process. But if we're going to lose, if islands are going to sink and, places are going to become uninhabitable, at least I can tell the people who used to reject it, I told you so. And that's a small measure of satisfaction that I can get from that.
Yeah, it's so important. Anyways, so we have the questions from the previous guests, and because it's from two entrepreneurs, they're also storytellers. One is, what is your coping mechanism and why while going and building your business? The second one is, based on your work experience and professional life, what do you think is something companies can do that is easy for them to make an impact? You can pick one if you.
Sure. Well, both are easy. The first one I've sort of talked about, and my coping mechanism when building a business is I play the long game. So nothing ever bothers me, right? I'm always thinking it doesn't matter if it doesn't get done today, because in a year, it won't matter whether it was done on Tuesday or Wednesday. So let's just make sure it gets done well on Wednesday. So again, I'm a person who doesn't deal with a lot of stress, or really any. So coping mechanisms aren't as required for me. But I think what you've probably said earlier is true, which is I'm not feeling stress and I'm coping well because of strategies that I've built into my life already. That the planning I've done and the mindset that I've established allows me to not have as much concern. I also genuinely don't care what anyone thinks about me, which is both a gift and a curse. My wife will tell you, sometimes it's fantastic to be around Matt because he doesn't care what other people think. And sometimes it's a disaster. And both of those things are true. But when you stop worrying so much about what people are thinking about you, then a lot of the problems that you perceive as problems go away, because it doesn't matter what anyone else is thinking. And it doesn't matter. Their criticism becomes irrelevant unless it's helpful. I love helpful criticism, but sort of when people throw stones at me, I say, just throw those stones at me. That's amusing. That makes me laugh. So that's the answer to that question. In terms of amplifying your message or doing something simpler or something that can make a big impact, I always think the answer is simply storytelling. I think that one of the tragedies that companies suffer from, or one of the disasters they suffer from, is they have a staff, whether it's 3 people or 3,000 people or 30,000 people. They have enormous numbers of people in their companies who are filled with stories that they could use to promote their company, to talk about their brand, lead that company forward. And they don't afford people the opportunity to tell those stories. There's a lot of wasted material and wasted content in companies, because rather than carving out a little bit of time for people to make eye contact and share aspects of their life and their work with each other, They're so focused on sort of the next task
Yeah.
that they don't have people connecting deeply in a company, building loyalty in a company, building trust with each other, and then mining some of that content for sales, marketing, branding, and all of those things. And it doesn't cost anything. They don't have to buy a machine. They don't have to build a building, right? They just have to create space, give over an hour a week. It's not going to cost much, and the results can be extraordinary.
Yeah, that is so true. That is so true. Maybe from my own personal experience, especially working in some kind of regulated big business, for example, banking, you're not even allowed to share a lot of things on social media.
Right. Yeah.
Which is sad. Yeah. Can you leave a question for the next guest?
Oh, right. Yes. So I like this question a lot. I often get asked sort of who my mentor or hero is, and I have a hard time with that question, honestly. It's hard for me to come up with people. I like this question instead. Tell me about the terrible person in your life who taught you a valuable lesson. I think that oftentimes we learn things from sort of the worst boss we've ever had, the parent who didn't understand us, the frenemy who, betrayed us. I think some of our most valuable lessons come in negative experiences. And I think that's also a great way to reframe a negative experience by looking for the takeaway in a similar way that I look at the most traumatic moment, the most horrific moment of my life, the robbery, and I take away the value from it. Unfortunately, I'm sort of stuck with the PTSD in my particular case. Yeah. But in most cases, you don't end up with that. In most cases, if you extract the value from a terrible situation, that terrible situation suddenly has purpose and meaning. So I'm always asking people, tell me about the worst person in your life and what they taught you. And that is a good way to start thinking about that experience in a better way.
Such a nice question. It's like a question and a lesson at the same time. I also love this quote. It's either a good time or a good story.
Yes, you're either having a good time or you're having a good story. Yeah, it's very true. Yeah. No one wants to hear about your great party, but they want to hear about your disastrous party. Yeah, that's the way storytelling is.
And then what you take away from this is a change.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for your time, Max. I really, really appreciate it. It's my pleasure to have you, and really, really thank you for taking a chance on me. I would love to hear more about your website and your new books coming up. I will put a link down below. I know you go to your website, mattydix.com.
Thank you.
And if you like this episode, you might want to check out these here as well. And they're all on my channel. And if you haven't subscribed, please hit the subscribe button. It really helps the channel a lot. And I'll see you next time.